I grew up in a house where love was measured by success and respect was tied to money. From the outside, we looked perfect, a wealthy family with a respected name, a large home, and a future that seemed guaranteed. But even as a child, I sensed that belonging in my family came with conditions. You were valued only as long as you reflected well on the family image. My parents were proud people. Appearances mattered more than emotions. Conversations at the dinner table were never about dreams or feelings. They were about profits, social status, and expectations. My siblings learned early how to fit into that world. They spoke confidently about ambition and success, about marrying well and climbing higher. I tried to do the same, but my heart was never fully in it. I cared more about people than prestige, more about purpose than praise. For a while, I still fit in. I had a decent job, dressed well, and played my role. My family tolerated my softer nature because I wasn't an embarrassment, yet. But life has a way of humbling even the most careful plans. A sudden economic downturn hit the company I worked for, and within weeks, I was laid off. I told myself it was temporary. I believed things would improve. My family, however, saw it differently. At first, they offered polite concern. Then the phone calls became shorter. Invitations stopped coming. I could hear the disappointment in my mother's voice whenever we spoke, like my struggles were a personal insult to her. When my savings ran out and I couldn't maintain the lifestyle they expected, the judgment became open. "You need to get your life together," my father said one evening, his tone sharp and final. "People are starting to talk." That sentence hurt more than anything else. Not because I was struggling, but because his biggest fear wasn't my pain. It was gossip. I asked for time, for understanding, for support, but in their eyes, failure was contagious. My brother avoided me entirely, as if poverty could rub off on him. My sister looked at me with pity mixed with embarrassment. I had become a reminder of everything they feared. The night it ended is still burned into my memory. I stood in the living room where I had once celebrated birthdays and holidays, holding back tears as my parents explained their decision. They said it calmly, almost professionally, like a business transaction. "As long as you live like this," my mother said, "you are no longer part of this family. No shouting, no drama, just rejection." I went to my room and packed what little I could into one suitcase. Each item felt heavier than it should have. Photos, old clothes, memories I wasn't allowed to keep. When I walked out the front door, no one followed me. No one asked if I was okay. The house behind me remained bright and warm, while the world ahead felt cold and uncertain. That night, I understood something important. I wasn't disowned because I lacked effort or character. I was disowned because I no longer fit the image they wanted to present. In losing their approval, I lost my family, but I also lost the illusion that their love had ever been unconditional. As I stepped into the darkness with nowhere to go, I felt broken, but also strangely free. I had nothing left to prove to them. I didn't know then how my story would end, only that I would have to survive without the people who were supposed to stand by me. And in that moment, alone and scared, I made a silent promise to myself. I would rebuild my life, not to impress them, but to honor who I truly was. Life after being disowned was nothing like I had imagined. There was no dramatic turning point, no sudden rescue, just a long stretch of quiet struggle. The first months were the hardest. I moved into a small, aging apartment in a part of town I had never even noticed before. The walls were thin, the paint was peeling, and the pipes rattled loudly at night. It was far from the life I once knew, but it was all I could afford. I took whatever work I could find. Mornings were spent cleaning offices before sunrise, and evenings were filled with long shifts at a local diner. Some days, exhaustion felt heavier than hunger. I learned how to stretch a single meal into two, how to walk instead of taking the bus, and how to smile politely when customers looked through me like I didn't exist. Pride became a luxury I could no longer afford. There were nights I cried myself to sleep, not because of the work, but because of the silence. No family calling to check in, no messages asking if I was okay. I had gone from being surrounded by people to feeling completely invisible. Yet somewhere in that loneliness, I discovered a quiet strength I didn't know I had. Every bill I paid, every day I survived, felt like a small victory. It was in that building that I met Mr. Alden. He lived in the apartment next to mine, and at first, we barely spoke. One evening, as I was coming home late from work, I saw him struggling to carry his groceries up the stairs. He looked frail, his hands trembling under the weight of the bags. Without thinking, I offered to help. He smiled in a way that felt rare and genuine. "Thank you," he said softly, as if he wasn't used to being noticed. That simple moment became a routine. I helped him with groceries and soon after with small things around his apartment. He was alone, just as I was. Over time, he began to share stories about his youth, his regrets, the people he had lost. I listened, not out of obligation, but because I understood what it meant to feel forgotten. I started cooking extra portions of my meals and bringing them to him. We ate together at his small kitchen table, talking about life and the choices that shape us. He never asked about my past, and I never asked about his. There was a mutual understanding that some stories reveal themselves only when they're ready. Despite my struggles, I refused to become bitter. I volunteered when I could, helped neighbors when they needed it, and treated people with kindness even when the world felt unkind to me. I didn't have much, but I had my integrity, and that mattered more than I realized at the time. Years passed quietly. My life didn't suddenly become easy, but it became meaningful. I found steadier work and learned to live within my means. Mr. Alden's health slowly declined, and I stayed by his side whenever he needed me. I accompanied him to doctor appointments, made sure he took his medication, and held his hand on the days when he felt especially weak. One evening, as we sat in silence, he looked at me with eyes full of emotion. "You have no idea how much you've changed my life," he said. I shrugged it off, telling him I was just doing what anyone would do, but deep down, I knew that wasn't true. Not everyone shows up when there's nothing to gain. I didn't realize then that those quiet years, filled with hardship and compassion, were shaping a future far greater than anything I had lost. While my family measured success in money and status, I was learning the value of loyalty, kindness, and love, the kind that expects nothing in return. As I stepped into the darkness with nowhere to go, I felt broken, but also strangely free. I had nothing left to prove to them. I didn't know then how my story would end, only that I would have to survive without the people who were supposed to stand by me, and in that moment, alone and scared, I made a silent promise to myself. I would rebuild my life, not to impress them, but to honor who I truly was. Years passed quietly, and life settled into a rhythm I had grown used to. I worked, I cared for Mr. Alden, and I slowly rebuilt a sense of stability in my small apartment. I had learned to live without the approval of my family, and for a while that was enough. But then, one gray morning, a letter arrived that I never expected, a funeral invitation. I held it in my hands, staring at the familiar family name printed in elegant letters. My heart thudded in my chest, a mixture of disbelief, anger, and curiosity. I had not been invited to birthdays, weddings, or graduations over the years, and now they sent me an invitation to a funeral. It felt like a test, a trap, or perhaps a cruel joke. For hours, I debated whether to go. The rational part of me screamed to ignore it, to protect myself from humiliation, but something else, a quiet, stubborn part of me, wanted to see what they would say if I showed up. The day of the funeral arrived, and I dressed simply. No expensive dress, no jewelry, no attempt to impress. I didn't need to. I only needed to be myself and to walk in knowing that I no longer belonged to them, no matter what they thought. The church was grand, with polished wooden pews and stained glass windows that caught the light just so. My family sat in the front rows, dressed in black, their faces carefully composed, their whispers carrying across the hall. I could feel their surprise even before I entered. "What is she doing here?" my sister hissed to my mother, her eyes wide. The words cut through the quiet hum of mourners, and I felt no shame. I walked past them, my steps measured and calm, and took a seat at the back, where I could observe without being observed. For the first time in years, I was invisible on my own terms. The service began, and the lawyer stepped forward. He cleared his throat and began speaking formally, his voice echoing in the tall hall. "We are gathered here today to read the final will and testament of Mr. Alden." The mention of his name caused a stir among a few of the other attendees, who murmured respectfully, though I sensed that few understood the bond I had shared with him. Then he paused, looking directly at me. "Before we begin, there is someone Mr. Alden specifically requested to be present." The silence that followed was heavy. My family's murmurs turned into gasps as all eyes shifted to me. I felt a strange mixture of fear and anticipation, but I remained seated, calm. Their expressions were a mirror of their past arrogance, confusion, disbelief, and perhaps the first trace of regret. The lawyer continued, and my pulse quickened. He spoke slowly, deliberately, as if savoring the moment. "By the final wish of Mr. Alden, all properties, accounts, and assets are to be inherited by her." My body stiffened. I felt the room tilt slightly, the words hanging in the air like a delicate, invisible weight. The reactions around me were priceless. My mother's lips parted, her composure faltering. My sister's eyes widened in shock, while my brother's face paled. None of them had anticipated this. They had disowned me for being poor, for not fitting their image of success, yet here I sat, the rightful heir to a fortune they had never expected to lose. The lawyer looked at them, his tone firm but calm. He stated clearly, "She showed me love when I had nothing to offer. She is my true family." I remained seated, letting the words settle. The humiliation my family had hoped to inflict on me had backfired entirely. The power dynamic had shifted, but I felt no need to gloat or speak. I had already won, not with anger, but with quiet persistence and unwavering integrity. As I left the church, the weight of years lifted from my shoulders. My family remained in stunned silence, their pride shattered. I had shown them something far greater than wealth, proof that love, loyalty, and kindness could surpass blood, privilege, and arrogance. And in that moment, I realized that the real inheritance was not the fortune itself, but the knowledge that I had survived, grown, and triumphed on my own terms. As I stepped into the darkness with nowhere to go, I felt broken, but also strangely free. I had nothing left to prove to them. I didn't know then how my story would end, only that I would have to survive without the people who were supposed to stand by me. And in that moment, alone and scared, I made a silent promise to myself. I would rebuild my life, not to impress them, but to honor who I truly was. The lawyer's words echoed in the hall like a bell tolling justice. "By the final wish of Mr. Alden, all properties, accounts, and assets are to be inherited by her." The room seemed to shrink around me as every eye turned toward me. I felt a strange calm wash over me, as if a long, dark storm had finally passed. The family who had once sneered at my poverty now stared at me with a mix of shock, disbelief, and, I suspected, a creeping sense of regret. My mother clutched her pearls and rose to speak, her voice shaking despite her attempts at control. "This must be a mistake. You can't mean—" Her words trailed off as she looked at the lawyer, hoping for a correction that never came. My sister's hands flew to her mouth, and my brother's face had gone pale, his usual confidence gone like smoke in the wind. They had disowned me, refused to acknowledge my struggles, and now their silence screamed louder than any words. I did not speak. I did not need to. The lawyer continued, reading the specifics of the inheritance with meticulous care, the estate, bank accounts, investments, even the contents of a small but valuable art collection, all under my name. Every item, every asset, every penny that they had assumed would remain in their hands was now mine. But the truth behind it all, the reason I was chosen, was even more profound. The lawyer's voice softened slightly as he read a personal note from Mr. Alden, addressed specifically to the family. "She showed me love when I had nothing to offer. She cared not for my wealth, my status, or my appearance. She acted out of kindness and loyalty, qualities that you failed to recognize in your own blood. She is my true family." I felt my chest tighten, but it wasn't from anger or triumph. It was from the realization of everything I had endured, the years of being invisible, the nights I cried myself to sleep, the moments I wondered if I would ever matter to anyone. And yet, all that pain had led to this moment, where integrity and compassion were recognized and rewarded. My family had lived by appearances, measuring love and loyalty in currency and social standing. They had valued the illusion of perfection over genuine connection, and now, for the first time, the scales had tipped in my favor, but I felt no urge to gloat. Revenge is sweetest not in humiliation, but in quiet, undeniable success. I stood slowly and made my way toward the door. I passed my family in the aisle, their faces etched with disbelief. My mother tried to reach out, perhaps for an apology, perhaps for recognition, but I did not stop. I had no need for reconciliation. Their lesson had been taught not through confrontation, but through the gentle inevitability of truth. Outside, the winter air was crisp and clear. The sun glinted off the snow, and for the first time in years, I felt entirely free. The weight of abandonment, the years of struggle, and the silent pain I had carried melted away. I had survived, yes, but I had done more than that. I had thrived, not because I sought revenge, but because I remained true to myself when the world had tried to convince me otherwise. As I walked away from the church, I realized something profound. The fortune was not the true inheritance. The real legacy was the proof that love, kindness, and integrity endure far beyond wealth and social status. Mr. Alden had seen me when my family did not. He had recognized my value, not in money or prestige, but in character. That recognition, that affirmation, was priceless. I did not look back. I did not need to. Their whispers, their stares, their regret, they were theirs to carry. I carried only gratitude, peace, and the quiet satisfaction of a life rebuilt. The sweetest revenge is not in anger or vengeance. It is in becoming the person you were always meant to be, in walking forward with grace, dignity, and unwavering self-respect. And so I walked into the next chapter of my life, not as the disowned daughter, but as the woman who had survived, grown, and inherited something far more valuable than money: freedom, dignity, and the knowledge that true love and loyalty always prevail. As I stepped into the darkness with nowhere to go, I felt broken, but also strangely free. I had nothing left to prove to them. I didn't know then how my story would end, only that I would have to survive without the people who were supposed to stand by me. And in that moment, alone and scared, I made a silent promise to myself. I would rebuild my life, not to impress them, but to honor who I truly was.